Coca-Cola was created by a man who was in pain, addicted, and honestly trying to fix his own life. John Pemberton was a pharmacist, yes, but before that, he was a soldier. He fought in the American Civil War, got seriously wounded, and like many soldiers at that time, he was treated with morphine. And morphine did what morphine does. It solved one problem and created another. Now he's addicted. So instead of going to therapy, because this is the 1800s and nobody is doing that, he does what he knows best. He starts experimenting with chemicals, trying to build something that can replace morphine. So when you hear people romanticize Coca-Cola, I want you to understand that you're looking at a coping mechanism that accidentally turned into a global product. In 1885, he creates something called French wine coca. That name alone should tell you everything. It's alcohol mixed with coca leaf extract, which at that time, it still had cocaine in it. And then he adds cola nut for caffeine. Now imagine that combination. Alcohol, cocaine, caffeine. And this is supposed to fix an addiction. You can already see the irony. But then, Atlanta bans alcohol in 1886, and suddenly, his formula cannot be sold the way it was. So he removes the alcohol, keeps the coca leaf, keeps the cola nut, adjusts the mixture, and now he has something new. On May 8th, 1886, he takes his syrup to Jacob's Pharmacy and they mix it with carbonated water. That is the first Coca-Cola. Just syrup and soda water in a glass, sold for 5 cents. It wasn't bottled and branded the way we know it today. Now this one, it was not a hit. On average, they were selling about 9 drinks a day. 9. So when people talk about Coca-Cola like it was destined to take over the world, you need to slow down and look at the reality. This thing was barely moving. It was being marketed as medicine. Headaches, digestion, even morphine addiction, which is ironic because that's what created it in the first place. Ads were going into newspapers like the Atlanta Journal, promises were being made, but the numbers, they were not matching the ambition. And while all of this is happening, something else in the background is also happening. Ownership, it's getting messy. By 1888, there isn't just one Coca-Cola. There are multiple versions, multiple agreements, and different people claiming rights to the same formula. You have co-partnerships forming with names like J.C. Mayfield, A.O. Murphy, C.O. Muller-High, and E.H. Bloodworth. Everyone is trying to get a piece of something they're not even sure they will succeed. And right in the middle of this confusion, one man starts moving very deliberately, Asa Candler. He starts buying shares quietly. On April 14th, 1888, he takes 1/3 stake for $550. While Pemberton is still struggling with health, addiction, and control, Candler is thinking long-term. Pemberton dies on August 16, 1888, and what happens is very strategic. Candler moves fast. He negotiates with Pemberton's son, Charlie, who is also struggling with addiction. He reportedly offers money to the family, even at the funeral stage, and within a very short time, he consolidates ownership. By August 30th, 1888, he has control. And when you look at the total amount he paid, roughly $2,300 to fully secure Coca-Cola, it sounds small today. But that moment right there, it's one of the most important acquisitions in business history. Because from that point on, Coca-Cola stops being an experiment and it starts becoming a business. And not just any business, it's becoming a system. What Candler understood, which Pemberton never did, is that you don't need the best product in the world, you need the best strategy around it. The man who built Coca-Cola is not the man who created it. It is Asa Candler. And Candler is coming into this story as a businessman who can smell opportunity from a distance and is not sentimental about how he gets it. By the time he fully takes control in 1888, Coca-Cola is still small. It's still inconsistent and it's still being sold as a medicinal tonic that may or may not work. There is no global vision yet. There is no empire yet, but Candler sees something that the inventor himself had never really locked into. This product needs to be everywhere. It does not need to be perfect. So the first thing that he does is refine it. He adjusts the flavor, standardizes the syrup, and most importantly, he starts building identity around it. A name that people remember. Coca-Cola. Even the name itself, written in that Spencerian script, it becomes part of the strategy. It's repetition, it's familiarity, it's something that your brain starts recognizing before you even taste it. And then, he gives it away. Coupons, free samples. He floods the market with the product without expecting immediate profit because he understands that people do not buy what they don't know. So instead of waiting for customers to come to him, he goes to them aggressively. Newspapers, signage, handouts, anything that puts Coca-Cola in front of people. And slowly, it starts to move. By 1895, he's already declaring that Coca-Cola is being sold in every US state and territory. Now, whether that statement was slightly ambitious or not, the point is this. The expansion was fast, very fast. But here is where Candler almost makes the biggest mistake of his career, and at the same time, accidentally creates one of the most powerful systems in business history. In 1899, two lawyers, Benjamin F. Thomas and Joseph B. Whitehead, they approach him. They want the rights to bottle Coca-Cola. Now remember, at this time, Coca-Cola is mostly being consumed at soda fountains. You go somewhere, they mix it fresh, you drink it there. Bottling, it means something totally different. It means mobility. It also means scale, and it also means you don't have to come to Coca-Cola anymore. Coca-Cola can come to you. And what does Candler do? He sells them the bottling rights for $1. $1. And the crazy part is, he never even collects it. Now, if you look at that decision quickly, you might think it was a mistake. You might think he gave away too much. But when you really sit with it, you realize that this is where Coca-Cola stops being a company and it starts becoming a system. Those bottlers, they're not employees. They are independent operators. They invest their own money. They build their own plants. They handle their own distribution. They take on the local risk. And all they need from Coca-Cola is the syrup. Coca-Cola keeps control of the formula, the brand, and the concentrate. Everyone else handles the heavy work. That is structure, and it spreads fast. By 1909, there's already hundreds of bottling plants. By 1920, bottled Coca-Cola is outselling fountain drinks. At that point, Coca-Cola is a drink that is everywhere people go. And while all this is happening, Candler is still pushing marketing like his life depends on it. Advertising budgets go up, and endorsement starts coming in. By 1904, they're already in national magazines. By 1905, even opera singers like Lillian Nordica, they're promoting it. So now Coca-Cola is not just available, it's visible. And it's visible constantly. That combination, availability plus visibility, is what starts turning it into something bigger than just a product. Candler eventually steps away in 1916 to become mayor of Atlanta. He leaves behind a company that is no longer fragile, no longer experimental, and no longer confused about what it is. It's now structured, expanding, and positioned. By the time Candler steps back in 1916, Coca-Cola has already built distribution. But what it has not yet built is global dominance. That one comes through a completely different kind of leadership. In 1919, a man named Ernest Woodruff, he leads a group through the trust company to acquire Coca-Cola for $25 million. Now that number might sound normal today, but at the time, that was serious money. It was a statement. And when they take over, they restructure the company, reincorporate it, and prepare it for something bigger than just national expansion. But the real shift happens a few years later when his son steps in. Robert W. Woodruff, he becomes president in 1923. Now pay attention, because this man, he's not thinking like a retailer or like a chemist. He's thinking like someone who wants Coca-Cola to sit inside culture itself. Under his leadership, Coca-Cola embeds itself. Sales jump from around $24 million to $30 million. Profits rise significantly, but that's not even the most important part. The most important part is how he does it. He makes Coca-Cola feel American in a natural way. Baseball games, billboards, everyday life. Coca-Cola becomes something you associate with normalcy, with routine, with comfort. It's something that feels familiar even before you open the bottle. And then he does something that is very strategic. He protects the mystery. In 1925, the formula is placed in a vault at a bank. This is because mystery adds value. It's not because someone was about to steal it. When people don't fully know what something is, they start respecting it differently. And Coca-Cola leans into that. Now let's talk about the expansion. Even before Woodruff fully settles in, Coca-Cola has already entered places like France in 1919. But under his leadership, that expansion becomes more deliberate and more structured. By 1928, Coca-Cola is already associating itself with global events like the Olympics in Amsterdam. That's positioning. Once you tie your brand to global moments, you stop being local, even if your operations are still catching up. And while all this is happening, Coca-Cola is also solving a very practical problem: imitations. Once a product becomes popular, copies start showing up everywhere. Names like Coca-Cola, Coca-Cola, people are just trying to ride the wave. So in 1915, Coca-Cola commissions a bottle that you can recognize in the dark. And that is not even a joke. That was the actual idea. The design comes from Alexander Samuelson and Al R. Dean. They were at the Root Glass Company. They base it loosely on a cocoa pod shape, even though they were actually looking for coca inspiration. That contour bottle, it becomes one of the most recognizable shapes in the world. Shape. So now Coca-Cola is attacking the market from every single angle. You recognize the name, you recognize the script, you recognize the bottle, and and you see it at events. At that point, even if you had never tasted it, you know it. And that's dominance. But then comes the moment that truly locks Coca-Cola into global consciousness. World War II. This is where the company makes one of the most important decisions in its entire history. Robert W. Woodruff, he makes a promise in 1943. Every American soldier will be able to get a Coca-Cola for 5 cents, no matter where they are, no matter what it costs the company. War zones, logistical chaos, and global conflict. And this company is saying, we will build the system required to deliver a soft drink into that environment. They set up 64 portable bottling plants across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Over 5 billion bottles are distributed. At that point, Coca-Cola is infrastructure. When those soldiers return home, they're not just returning with memories of war, they are returning with a habit. And now Coca-Cola is global. It has already planted itself in multiple countries during the war. That's how you expand without announcing an expansion. After the war, everything accelerates. Advertising moves to television, and the brand becomes even more emotional. Even Santa Claus, the image that people recognize today, it's shaped through Coca-Cola campaigns starting in the 1930s and continuing for decades. So now Coca-Cola is shaping imagery, culture, and memory. By the time Coca-Cola enters the 1970s and early 1980s, it's not just leading the market, it's the market. But something starts happening in the background. Pepsi. Now, Pepsi is not trying to out-history Coca-Cola. It's not even trying to out-tradition it. It's going after taste. Let's talk about the Pepsi challenge. The blind taste tests. People picking Pepsi over Coca-Cola without knowing which is which. For the first time in a very long time, they're not just competing on distribution or branding. They are competing on preference. This is where things start going wrong. By 1983, Coca-Cola's market share, it had dropped significantly compared to its earlier dominance. And internally, there is pressure, so they try to fix it. They do what they think is logical. They go back to the lab. They conduct over 200,000 taste tests. They spend millions of dollars on research. Everything is data-driven, and everything looks correct on paper. And the conclusion, people prefer a sweeter formula. So on April 23rd, 1985, Coca-Cola does something that still shocks people up to this day. They replace the original formula completely. They replace it with what becomes known as New Coke. Guys, I'm telling you, this one was not a small change. It was not a limited edition. It was not a test in one region. They removed the original Coca-Cola from the market, just like that, and introduced a new version. This new version, it was based on what the data said people wanted. Now, this is where you see the difference between numbers and reality. Because the reaction is immediate and it's not good.
I think the new Coke is too sweet. I like the old Coke better.
We're trying to start a grassroots campaign to get the old Coke back.
Can somebody out there tell me why Coke did it? Why they changed?
You have over 40,000 complaints. You have 8,000 calls a day flooding your hotline, people writing letters, organizing boycotts, talking about Coca-Cola like it's part of their identity that had just been taken away. Imagine a soft drink creating that level of emotional reaction. That is when Coca-Cola realizes that people were never buying the taste, they were buying the memory, they were buying the familiarity, and they were buying something that had been part of their lives for decades. And Coca-Cola, in one decision, they tried to replace all of that with a formula. That's the mistake, the assumption, not the taste. Data told them what people preferred in a sip, but it didn't tell them what people were attached to over time. So after just 79 days, Coca-Cola reverses the formula.
That all of the time and money and skill poured into consumer research on the new Coca-Cola could not measure or reveal the depth and abiding emotional attachment to original Coca-Cola felt by so many people.
On July 10th, 1985, they bring back the original formula as Coca-Cola Classic. Instead of weakening the brand, it strengthens it. Sales surge, and they outperform Pepsi again. Suddenly, what looked like one of the biggest mistakes in corporate history, it turns into one of the most powerful reminders of how deeply people are connected to the brand.
There's a new brand name for the company. Coca-Cola Classic is the original formula.
Internally, no major executives are fired. There is no dramatic leadership shakeup. In fact, years later, the CEO at the time, Roberto Goizueta, he even celebrates the anniversary of New Coke. Why? Because whether intentional or not, Coca-Cola just proved it is resilient, almost untouchable. And while all this drama is happening, Coca-Cola is still expanding. They launched Diet Coke in 1982, which becomes one of the most successful product launches in beverage history. They introduce new packaging like PET bottles, they diversify, they innovate. They even take Coca-Cola to space in 1985. At that point, they are competing on perception. Now, while the public is focused on new Coke, something is continuing in the background. The system, the bottling network, and the distribution machine. Because no matter what happens at the top, that system keeps running. And that's the strength of Coca-Cola. It's the structure behind it. By now, Coca-Cola is everywhere. The branding is perfect, the distribution is unmatched, and the product has become part of daily life across continents. But when something reaches that level of power, it attracts pressure, it attracts scrutiny, and over time, it starts collecting stories that don't fit in commercials. In 1909, long before Coca-Cola became the polished global brand that we know today, the US government comes after it. The case is called United States versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola, and that's not a small issue. Authorities are accusing the company of selling a product that is both misbranded and potentially harmful because of its caffeine content. The argument is that it could affect the brain, behavior, and even motor control, as in driving. Now imagine, a product that is being marketed as a tonic, as something beneficial, is now being dragged into court as something dangerous. The case runs for years. Scientists are brought in, arguments go back and forth, and eventually, Coca-Cola is forced to adjust. They reduce the caffeine content, as in they adapt. So you see the pattern. Coca-Cola does not collapse under pressure, it adjusts and continues. And then there's the ingredient story. I saw you guys talking about it. People love to oversimplify, but they don't want to understand. Yes, early Coca-Cola contained coca leaf extract. Yes, that extract originally had traces of cocaine. That was not hidden at the time. It was part of the formula. But as global attitudes toward drugs changed, Coca-Cola quietly removed the psychoactive components by 1929, leaving only non-narcotic extracts. Now fast forward, because these controversies, they just grow. In 1944, a woman named Gladys Escola is injured when a Coca-Cola bottle explodes in her hand. This becomes a landmark legal case because it helps establish the principle that companies can be held responsible for defective products even without direct proof of negligence. One incident, it reshapes product liability law. That is the scale Coca-Cola is operating at. Now let's move into workplace and racial discrimination. In 1999, Coca-Cola faces one of the largest lawsuits in its history when around 2,000 African American employees, they accuse the company of systemic discrimination. They're talking about patterns, pay disparities, and promotion barriers, a culture that they describe as limiting their growth. The case does not drag on forever. It settles in the year 2000 for $192.5 million. At the time, that's the largest employment discrimination settlement in US history. Now companies don't pay that kind of money for small misunderstandings. Even after that settlement, the conversation continues. Protests, internal reforms, and public scrutiny. Now let's go global. Coca-Cola is operating in places where labor conditions, political environments, and enforcement systems, they are very different. In Colombia, allegations emerge linking bottling operations to violence against union workers. We are talking about claims of intimidation, even killings tied to paramilitary groups. Lawsuits are filed, some are dismissed, but the attention remains. Now add environmental pressure. In India, specifically in Kerala, a Coca-Cola plant becomes the center of a major controversy in 2004. Local communities accuse the company of depleting groundwater. Farmers complain that water levels are dropping, and protests build. The plant is eventually shut down. Similar concerns appear in other regions: water usage, plastic waste, and environmental impact. Coca-Cola becomes one of the most criticized companies globally when it comes to plastic pollution, producing millions of tons of plastic every year. Think about the contradiction. On one side, Coca-Cola markets happiness, sharing, and unity. On the other side, it's been questioned for resource use, environmental strain, and global waste. Then you have financial and ethical controversies. At one point in the 2000s, Coca-Cola is accused of channel stuffing.
I'm out here on the loading dock, Maria, kind of to illustrate, because this is where the channel gets stuffed, the distribution channel. You know, generally, once a company's product leaves here, goes out the door, it is considered sold. But is it really?
It's essentially pushing excess inventory onto bottlers to make sales numbers look stronger than they actually are. That leads to a $137.5 million settlement in 2008. Again, not small, not coincidental, but the company moves. You can just see the pattern. Coca-Cola does not avoid controversy, it absorbs it, it adapts, and it keeps moving. Even in recent years, you see similar cycles. Criticism of operations in certain countries, backlash over internal training materials, and questions about authenticity in advertising. The conversation never really stops. but neither does the company. The company at the center, the Coca-Cola Company, it focuses on one thing above everything else. The concentrate, the syrup. That's the core. That's where the money is. Everything else that you see, the bottling, the trucks, the distribution, the crates in kiosks, the fridges in shops, the logistics that makes sure you can find a Coke almost everywhere, that is handled by a completely different layer, independent bottlers. Hundreds of them across more than 200 countries. Coca-Cola designed a system where it owns the brain, but not the body. The company controls the formula, the branding, the global marketing, and the pricing structure of the concentrates. Then it sells that concentrate to bottlers who are responsible for everything else. They build the factories, they hire the staff, they manage transportation, they deal with local regulations, they handle currency risk, and they fight the day-to-day battles of operating in their specific markets. So when something goes wrong locally, it's often the bottler that absorbs the shock first, not the parent company. That's the design. Coca-Cola is light, asset light. It doesn't need to own thousands of factories across the world to dominate globally. It just needs to control what cannot be replaced: the formula, the brand, and the system. That is why a single shipment of concentrate, it can be turned into millions of bottles across different countries, each one produced locally, distributed locally, but still tied back to one central structure. And that structure, it's extremely efficient. Now let's talk a little bit about distribution. This is where Coca-Cola becomes almost impossible to compete with. The system is not just formal supermarkets and big retail chains. It goes deeper than that. Small kiosks, roadside vendors, informal markets, remote towns, places where logistics is difficult, infrastructure is inconsistent, and margins are tight. Now add branding. Coca-Cola spends billions on marketing, but it doesn't just advertise the drink. It attaches itself to moments: happiness, sharing, celebrations, sports, music, even global events like the Olympics. So now you have a product that is not just available everywhere, it's emotionally present everywhere. People are buying Coca-Cola because it feels familiar, not just because they are thirsty. Because it has been positioned as part of everyday life.